Hello students. Last lecture we completed fourth poem of section second. Today we learn fifth poem of section second. That is Father Returning Home. Father Returning Home. Title. What is title? Father Returning Home. The title indicates that the poet is talking about the monotonous routine of his father. Monotonous routine. Monotonous means boredom routine, bore routine of his father. It also indicates that the poet is about to describe the event in detail. So, the poet of the title of the poem indicates that the poet talking about the monotonous routine. Okay, then next poet. Just we continue this poem with help of the appreciation points. First point, that is a title. Just we completed it, and now after title, the second point, that is a poet. Poet. Father Returning Home is an autobiographical poem by Dilip Chitre. The poet was a celebrated bilingual poet and translator with a remarkable work in Marathi and English. His versatile creativity extends to painting, filmmaking, and his notable contribution as a magazine columnist. He received the prestigious Sahitya Academy Award both for poetry as well as for his well known translation work. Says Tuka. Says Tuka, that is a popular abhangas by Sant Tukaram. So, Dilip Chitre, who is a well known Indian poet and writes in English as well as in Marathi. His themes are remarkable. He mostly writes about the alienation, estrangement, and death. Alienation means parkepana, estrangement, and death. All these subjects related to modernism, that is modernity. Next slide or next point, that is poem. What is the poem? The name of the poem is Father Returning Home. This poem expresses the theme of separation and generation gap between father and his children. What is the main theme of the poem? That is separation and generation gap. Generation gap between father and his children. The poet has used vivid visuals to express the theme. It depicts the pathetic loneliness of the father who is denied basic needs. So, this poem draws a portrait of a suburban commuter. Commuter means who travel regularly from one place to another, typically to work. So, this poem draws a portrait of a suburban commuter. Suburban means Upanagriya. Upanagar, suburban commuter. So, it draws a portrait of a suburban commuter. It depicts his dull, monotonous, exhausting, and equally pitiable daily routine. So, this poem depicts or picturizes the suburban man's dull, monotonous, dull life, boredom life, exhausting, and equally pitiable daily routine. This poem also describes a forced alienation at home, which is reflected through the stale food and lack of sharing. His children refuse to share their jokes and sorrows with the hard-working father, who as a result is forced to retire into solitude. This very painful loneliness is a symbol of man's isolation from the materialistic man-made world. So it's the main theme, that is painful loneliness is a symbol of this man's isolation from the materialistic man-made world. Third point, that is a poem is completed. First point just we described about title, then second poet, then third poem, and now fourth theme. What is the theme of the poem? Father returning home. What is the theme of this poem? The theme of the poem is an experience and a routine of an aged man. The poem also deals with the miseries of elderly people in big cities. The poet talks about the loneliness of his father from the man-made world. So, Dilip Chitre's this poem is written by Dilip Chitre. It's an autobiographical poem. So this poem also deals with the miseries, sorrows of elderly people who live in big cities. The poet also talks about loneliness, that is isolation, means loneliness of his father from the man-made world. So just we completed 4 points of the appreciation also. And now just we will continue this poem. Okay, this point we completed, that is Dilip Chitre's introduction, then introduction about the poem, means poem, then theme, and now continue actual poem, that is explanation of the poem, Father returning home. This poem is full of so many figures of speech and imageries, symbols. So try to understand the poetic devices. Father returning home. My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. Suburbs slide past his unseeing eyes. His shirt and pants are soggy, and his black raincoat stained with mud, and his bag stuffed with books is falling apart. His eyes, dimmed by age, fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. Now I can see him getting off the train like a sword, like a word, like a word dropped from a long sentence. He hurries across the length of the grey platform, crosses the railway line, enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. Home again, I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. He goes into the toilet to contemplate. What is mean by contemplate? Refer glossary. Contemplate means think deeply. Then estrangement means alienation. He goes into the toilet to contemplate, means he goes into the toilet to think deeply. Man's estrangement from a man-made world. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. A few droplets cling to the graying hair on his wrist. His sullen children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. He will now go to sleep, listening to the listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. This is the poem. Is written by Dilip Chitre. Now we explain one by one line. Father returning home. Father returning home. So the title indicates for what? The title indicates the poet is about to describe the events in detail. He is talking about the monotonous life of the passengers or commuters. Father returning home. This poem focuses on the theme of alienation or estrangement experienced by the aged in their twilight years. My father travels on the late evening train, standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. First three lines are First four lines are the examples of alliteration. Alliteration means same sound is repeated. First line, my father travels on the late evening train. That is a travels T and train T. Sound T is repeated. So alliteration. Second line, third line and fourth line also carries alliteration. The poem begins with the speaker's description of his father traveling home in a late evening train after a long day of break, after a long day of work. That is standing among silent commuters in the yellow light. So, father traveling home in a late evening train after long day of work. He is standing among the passengers in the yellow light compartment. The cheerless surroundings intensify his sense of gloom. He has no intention to look at the suburbs sliding past, as he doesn't find anything interesting, hence adding to his monotony. So, hence adding to his boredom. His shirts and pants are soggy, and his black raincoat stained with mud, and his bag stuffed with books. It indicates he is an educated person. It is a rainy day, and his clothes are wet, and his raincoat muddy. He is struggling to carry his bag, which is stuffed with books. The reference to the books indicates that he is an educated man, not unimportant as one might think due to his ordinary journey. His poor eyesight further fades at the prospect of returning home, as home is also a place where he feels isolated. Home is also a place where he feels isolated. He gets down from the train like a word dropped from a long sentence, as though he is unimportant or insignificant to the rest of the world. So, he is falling apart, his eyes dimmed by age, fade homeward through the humid monsoon night. Now I can see him getting off the train, like a word dropped from a long sentence. Like a word dropped from a long sentence. It's an example of simile. Using There is a comparison using the word like. Simile means here father is compared to an unimportant word, like a word dropped from a long sentence. He hurries across the length of the grey platform. Grey platform. It's a symbolic phrase, symbolic of old age. Grey platform indicates old age. Crosses the railway line. Enters the lane. His chappals are sticky with mud, but he hurries onward. Home again. I see him drinking weak tea. Weak tea, that is example of personification. Actually, tea is an inanimate thing. I see him drinking weak tea. eating a stale chapati, reading a book. So he hurries across the grey platform, which is symbolic of his dull and monotonous life, and enters the lane by crossing the railway line. Though his footwear is muddy, and he continues to walk. Next stanza. Home again, I see him drinking weak tea, eating a stale chapati, reading a book. So, in this stanza, the poet depicts the isolation of his father in his own home. The poet sees his father drinking weak tea and eating a stale chapati while reading a book. So it's a good fellow, poor fellow, and who is drinking weak tea and eating a stale chapati while reading a book. It indicates isolation of the father. This scene highlights the father's alienation from the world around him, but he doesn't seem to have any complaint against this. He goes into the toilet to contemplate man's estrangement from a man made world. Contemplate means think deeply. He goes into the toilet to think deeply. Man's estrangement from a man made world. Estrangement means alienation. Coming out, he trembles at the sink. Actually, he trembles at the sink. Trembles, that is onomatopoeic word. So, this scene highlights the father's alienation from the world around him. But he doesn't seem to have any complaint against this, against these all members of the family. Now he goes to the toilet and thinks about how men become isolated from the man-made world. The indifference that he suffers in the outside world, he suffers it at home too. As he washes his hands, it trembles due to old age. Trembles means thartharne. It's onomatopoeic word. It trembles as he washes his hands. It trembles due to old age and perhaps also from the fearful thought of his isolation from the rest of the world. Coming out, he trembles at the sink, the cold water running over his brown hands. The cold water running over his brown hands. A few droplets cling to the graying hair on his wrist. So, as he washes his hands, it trembles due to old age and perhaps also from the fearful thought of his isolation from the rest of the world. The few drops of water clinging to his grey hair, and it symbolizes that the old man is just holding on to his life, which bothers nobody. His children do not share a healthy bond with him, means there is no strong bond or no strong relationship between two generations, that is, father and his children. They don't share their jokes and sorrows with him, highlighting the generation gap that further separates the man from his surroundings. A few droplets cling to the graying hair on his wrist. His sullen children. Sullen children means bad tempered children. His bad tempered children have often refused to share jokes and secrets with him. He will now go to sleep, listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. He will now go to sleep, listening to the static on the radio. So, static on the radio, listening to the static on the radio. That is a symbolic of escaping from the mundane world. So, this materialistic world, he wants to escape from the materialistic world, listening to the static on the radio. It's a symbolic of escaping from the mundane world, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren. Now he is thinking of past and future with hope of his ancestors. Ancestors indicates past and grandchildren indicates future. So, listening to the static on the radio, dreaming of his ancestors and grandchildren. So, now he is thinking of past and future with hope. In the final lines of the poem, the man listens to the static on the radio as he goes to sleep. He dreams about the past when nomads who didn't have a permanent home braved hardships to discover a new subcontinent and built a new world for themselves. However, everything has changed now because even with permanent homes and countless people around, man is estranged from the society that he himself built. He even dreams of his grandchildren, as these dreams about the past and the future are the only way he can find some respite from the sordid present. So, listening to the static on the radio, so he wants to escaping from the mundane world, materialistic world, and now he is dreaming, thinking of past and future with hope, thinking of nomads entering a subcontinent through a narrow pass. So he even dreams of his grandchildren, as these dreams about the past and the future. So it's the only way he can find some respite from his sordid present. So it's an easy poem, and free verse means just you read the poem and then you can understand the poem. So before explaining or before discussing the poem, we completed 4 points of appreciation, and now we can understand about next 4 points of appreciation. Now we can understand easily. Next, that is a 5th point, style. What is the style of the poem? This poem is written in a free verse. Free verse means that is a freely, no rhythm, then no rhyming pairs. So it's called free verse. Means just you read it and you can understand it. So this poem is written in a free verse. It's a style of the poem, free verse. Remember these points. Length of the line is not equal. Means length of the line is uneven, not fixed. The poem has no stanza pattern. No stanza pattern is there. The poem is of 24 lines. It is written in a simple language. Visual imagery is used in abound. So the poet uses visual imagery. The poem has a strong picturesque quality. Picturesque quality means picturize quality. With the help of so many words, poet wants to create pictures for the readers. So it's a style of the poem. Remember these points: free verse, length of the poem not fixed, no stanza pattern, total 24 lines poem, simple language, visual imagery, and picturesque quality. Fifth point is completed. Next, that is sixth point, special features of the poem. The poet has used the special effects of visual imagery to describe the theme of loneliness. Means with the help of visual imagery we can understand the theme of loneliness, the theme of alienation. So we can understand easily with these visual imageries. So the poet has used the special effects of visual imagery to describe the theme of loneliness. The images of local train. Now these images are so important. The images of local train, late evening, yellow light, unseen eyes, dimmed eyes are remarkable. So don't forget it. Try to understand these images. Local train, late evening, the images of local train, late evening, yellow light, unseen eyes, dimmed eyes. So these images are very important. So these are special features of the poem used by poet. Used by the poet. Next point of appreciation, that is significance or message. Significance means importance. Importance. What is the message of the poem? The poem is significant in many ways. There are so many ways. This poem is important in many ways as it depicts the pathetic picture of a lonely man. Try to understand this point. This poem depicts the pathetic picture of a lonely man in metropolitan city. You know metropolitan city. Metropolitan city, that is Mumbai, Calcutta, Chennai and Delhi. Metropolitan city. What is mean by metropolitan? Where all types of caste, religion, civilizations, means so many types of the peoples are live in one city, means metropolitan city. That is, so it depicts the pathetic picture of a lonely man in metropolitan city. The poem towards the behavior of family members and indirectly expects an improvement in behavior and inspire to appreciate the hard work of elderly people. So try to understand the hard work of elderly people and try to understand the difference between generation gap. So the poem towards the behavior of family members and indirectly expects an improvement in behavior. Next, that is last point, 8 point, conclusion and opinion. Conclusion and opinion. We can conclude that this poem is autobiographical in nature. The poem draws a picture of a lonely father and it is well understood by the readers. A long lingering effect is successfully created. Okay, now this poem completed. Is it completed? Huh.